Okay, hello there. Today is April the 17th, 2018. I'm glad you're going to be watching this. My name is Paul Glumaz, and I'm involved very much over the last 44 years with the LaRouche and the movement of LaRouche. And he's right now in Germany. He's 95 years old. He still has a presence. And we're very lucky that he lived this long because he's given us tremendous amounts of wealth of concepts and ideas which are now beginning to be applied on a global scale. Now, 40 years ago or so, actually about 40 years ago, the movement put out a book on the British and the drug trade. It was called Dope Incorporated, and it went through the whole history of the drug trade, the offshore financial system that was created for laundering the drug money, and how that money was being recycled back into the United States through the Cayman Islands and many other places. This is where Soros gets his money, and to buy up the U.S. economy, to strip the U.S. economy. So this has been a process of looting that the British have been doing to the United States, like a reconquered colony for a very long period of time, 40 years. We had a huge fight over whether the largest drug laundering money bank in the world at that time, and probably still today, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, was going to get his hooks into the United States by buying up Marine Midland Bank in New York. And the banking superintendent, Muriel Siebert of New York, said no, but the Federal Reserve overruled her later on, and under Volcker, and we ended up with the foot in the door for the British to come in and start taking over our financial system, and our industrial base started to be purchased and bought. And you had the whole Michael Milken, the leverage buyouts, the whole hostile takeover, the change in the laws. They railroaded a whole bunch of senators and congressmen in order to get these laws through Congress. The FBI played a major role in that. So here you have, in the late 70s, early 80s, the integration of the FBI targeting the opponents to the takeover of the United States. People like Harrison Williams from New Jersey was a very powerful, prominent senator who was totally opposed to the deregulation of the banking system and so forth. And he was taken down by the FBI, and he didn't do anything wrong. But no, the senators were cowed. Other congressmen were cowed. They didn't come to his defense because the FBI, was the power being deployed, and the Justice Department was the power being deployed, just as it is now against Donald Trump. So this has been the history of the dismantling of the United States, and to this day, every year, the greatest amount of foreign direct investment doesn't come from anywhere but Britain. Britain is the country with the largest foreign direct investment every year. This last year, it was $500 billion of direct foreign investment. Where does a 60 million person nation, as if that's what it is, get $500 billion to invest in the U.S.? Well, they are at the center of the financial system. They're at the center of the offshore tax havens, treasure islands, where everybody sets up, all the companies set up an account, right, where they can escape taxes. It's estimated that there's $50 trillion in all of these tax havens. Not all of them are British, but they are. That is the system. The system is outside of the sovereignty of nations, outside of the government. So we've been going after the British, and the looting that the British and their accomplices have been doing to the United States and the world. The drug trade, the money laundering, the terrorism. Then later in the 90s, we went after this creating of terrorism. Back in the 90s, coming out of the Afghan war in the late 70s, early 80s, they began to create this international terrorism. These are not terrorists, really. They're mercenaries. They're being paid. and they're using the some kind of religious thing as a cover, but they're not really religious. They're mercenaries. They're killers. They're killers for profit, and there's been a development of this killers for profit under a religious name. What do they do in the areas that they rape and pillage and put the women into sex slavery, and they do all the things that the old mercenaries used to do, the pirates used to do in the good old days, the crusaders, they do the same. There's no difference. They're just a bunch of killers, that are being propped up by massive financial support from the dark shadow economy. That's the British. So this has been going on for a long time, and we've been our movement has been cataloging it for 4 decades. We've been telling you this is what they're doing. This is where the cocaine cartels. This is how create the cocaine cartels. This is how they do it. This is where the money goes. We've been doing that for 40 years, right? And finally, in the last few weeks, after 40 years, it has been caught up. It's caught up with them. They are now the British intelligence. British intelligence is MI6 international intelligence is totally integrated with this. When you retire from MI6, you go into you get an upgrade into the private sector of intelligence. It's the private sector of intelligence from which graduates from MI6 go, that you get the most powerful elements. These are private. They're still operating under the crown. They're still operating under the financial system, but they're doing it privately. Someone like Christopher Steele creates a company after he retires, Orbis. It takes in $200 million worth of client fees. What are they doing? Bumping people off? Who knows? But this is the guy that set everything set into motion around Trump being a Russian, being influenced by Russia. So the same British created this crazy concocted thing about Russia attacked Britain by poisoning these two ex-KGB officer and his daughter. Totally insane. And we have to go rally all of the rest to stand up to the Russians and prepare, because they invaded us, and the whole thing was turning out to be a hoax. It turns out that the OPCW, the Office of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has sent the samples to Switzerland, and it wasn't Novichok. It was a very powerful psychotropic substance called BZ, and their symptoms all manifest the same thing, and that the Novichok would have worn out by the time that they got it into the Swiss labs. So any presence of Novichok had to be placed there after the incident. So the whole thing is unraveling. The same thing with the chemical incident that triggered the attack, right? That triggered the attack. There's people in the photographs that were there, that were in the videos, who were there, and they're saying, this was not a gas attack. This was something else. This was staged. This whole thing was staged, and it's all over the media. And the Russians are publicly saying they have incontrovertible evidence that the White Helmets and the British staged this whole thing. Why? Because the guy who runs the White Helmets is a former military officer, former intelligence officer with the British. And the USAID under Obama gave him $26 million. And they're part of Al Qaeda. So we gave part of Al Qaeda $26 million to so-called be able to go into these areas and stage these incidents. And then use them as a precursor or as an excuse. Does Trump know this? No, I don't think Trump knows that. I think he's being lied to on a massive scale. I don't think Trump really has any idea of just how duplicitous and deep this thing goes. But I'm sure once he finds out, he's going to be stunned. They told Trump, according to our sources, they told Trump, well, it couldn't possibly be faked. The terrorists don't have the propaganda capability to do that. To make it, to be able to make it stick if it were fake. But the truth of the matter is the British made it stick. And they're being called out, not only by the Russians but by the Chinese. And this is very significant, in their own name. So now we get to the more profound issue here. The British don't like to operate in the light. They always operate in the shadows, behind the scenes, peddling lies, rumor, innuendo. This is how British intelligence operates, both in the private aspect as well as in the public aspect. They spread rumors. They operate behind the scenes. They set different forces against each other. They run all kinds of operations, and they have the money of the global financial system to back these private entities that are like Orbis, for instance. And they run all these operations, and it's always in the shadow. It's always behind the back of the United States. The United States always gets the blame for their operations. They always turn around and say, well, it's the U.S. We're doing what the U.S. said, or the U.S. did this, blah, blah, blah. This is how they hide themselves, so that they're not exposed. Well, they've been exposed by the Russians, fully exposed. And we want to take that exposure into the United States. Now, what's going on? Why are the British doing this? Okay, well, the editor-in-chief of the London Daily Telegraph, Sir Alistair Heath, I don't know if he's a sir, but he might as well be. He says this: forget NATO. We need to build a new alliance like we never have before to confront Russia and China, whom he calls totalitarian capitalists. Totalitarian capitalists is what he calls them. Meaning, they want economic development, and they're determined to use the power of the government to promote the development of the nation, and they're willing to use capitalist means within the context of the development of the nation to do that. That's totalitarian capitalist. Lincoln was a totalitarian capitalist. FDR was a totalitarian capitalist. John F. Kennedy was a totalitarian capitalist. And so was George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. They were totalitarian capitalists. They were capitalists, yes, and they wanted to develop. And they believed in using the power of the government to promote the credit, to develop. That's totalitarian capitalism. What's not totalitarian capitalism? Well, you let the drug traffickers run wild. You let the offshore financial system run wild. They get to decide. No nation gets to decide. That's totalitarianism. Only people that get to decide are the non-nations. The non-national aspect. Oh, you can't have the Federal Reserve. You can't have the government, involved in promoting development. That's, you have to go to the bankers first. The bankers decide. The market decides. Who is the market? A bunch of criminals. Financial system. A criminal financial system of speculation and avoiding taxes. Avoiding taxes in tax havens. But once your money's in a tax haven, who controls your money? It is not there for your country. It's not there for any country. It's there for people like George Soros and people like that to use however they want, for the empire. It's for the empire. You have to understand, the empire. What is the empire? It's drugs. What is the empire? Terrorism. What is the empire? It's cultural warfare against nations. It's our values, our liberal democratic values. What are our liberal democratic values? You can do anything you want if you're rich enough. Those are liberal economic values. That's what they're talking about. Our values. And totalitarian capitalism, no, they don't believe in our values. They want their poor people to get better. They want to eliminate poverty. They want to get out of out of third world conditions and have a future for. Oh no. That's you don't have a right to do that. That's against us. That's against our values, right? Our values. All these people that put their money in all these stocks and put their money in all these funds, which are all speculating like crazy, and then the Federal Reserve and the other central banks in the world have to bail out the system to discounting the toxic financial assets. based on a lie that the toxic financial assets are worth something. So the Federal Reserve and all the central banks technically are bankrupt because they're holding all this worthless financial speculative finance, which they have now monetized, given money so that they can create more toxic financial assets. That's the system of our values, mind you, and that's, you know, and if any major bank is about to go under, believe me, the derivatives and the financial structure. This financial structure comes first. Your deposits come last. Okay, that's the way it works. So the bank's obligations come last. They'll convert that. It's called a bail-in. They'll convert that into bank shares. So what you're dealing with is our values. So what he's saying, what Alistair Heath is saying, is that we must mobilize and regroup all our values, all the democratic institutions against the totalitarian capitalist menace of China and Russia. Well, what is the menace? It's the Belt and Road. That's the menace. The menace is that this thing is growing very fast. These 100 countries are coming in. They want to develop. Of course they want to develop. You don't want to, you know, and when you, okay, so they say all those corrupt little countries in Africa and the corrupt countries are all a bunch of corruption. Well, of course they're corrupt. They're poor. Corruption, poverty is what creates corruption because people are willing to do whatever they can to survive. They'll you know, they got to survive. So yeah, they're gonna be corruptible. You better believe they're gonna be corruptible. But if they're middle class, well, that's a different story. They don't have such an incentive to be corrupt. But if you're poor, you have an incentive to be as corrupt as you have to be to survive. And so the view of the Chinese is if you develop the area, there'll be less corruption, and people won't become terrorists either, because they see a better life. They see a better life. They won't want to get the money for being mercenaries to go around killing people. Right? How do you create mercenaries? Well, you know, it's extreme poverty and backwardness, and you want out. Well, one way out is to become a mercenary. I mean, that was like it was in the Middle Ages. If you were in the Middle Ages and you wanted out of being a peasant, well, then that was one of the only ways to go out of being a peasant, is to go be a mercenary, become a killer. That's how you get out of being a peasant. Well, it's the same thing today as it was in the Middle Ages. Hasn't changed. It's just the same kind of conditions as the Middle Ages. That's all. That's what has to change. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with this terrorism thing that's being deployed. And so they're regrouping. And they intend to get Trump out of the way one way or another, either out of the way or sidelined or whatever, because they got to stop totalitarian capitalism from taking over the world. You know, it's us anti-totalitarian capitalists versus the totalitarian capitalists of the world. So that's what's going on. And so all these incidents that how you saw, the incident in London with the poisoning, the incident in Syria, they're all organizing to organize this coalition, to put the heat on France and Germany and say, you're either with us or you're with them. And so that's what's going on. But the whole thing isn't really working. It's not really working. Because people are onto it, and they're calling out the British as the instigators, as the provocateurs, as the coordinators, as the organizers of it. And this is huge. This is huge. Meanwhile, the people of Great Britain are suffering. They're suffering incredibly from continued the erosion of their living standards and conditions of life. And there's a growing revolt going on. Part of what you saw with the Brexit now is a growing revolt against Britain's involvement in these wars, just like there is in the U.S. So that's what's going on. Now, very interestingly, we got news today that Pompeo, the CIA director and nominee for state, has been in North Korea, meeting with North Koreans, preparing the way for, and I think Kim Jong-un is going to be meeting with Moon, and they're now moving to actually resolve the entire thing, and end World War II, and have an agreement going on. This is huge. Now if this comes off, it's a total screw up for the British. Now Abe is meeting with, having dinner, had dinner tonight with Prime Minister of Japan. Had dinner tonight with Trump. I don't know which way the Japanese are going to go, but this is a turning point. This is a turning point. Now, what happened is you get two different versions. The U.S. version that Trump announced is that all our missiles hit their targets and nothing stopped them, and the Syrians tried to stop them, but their missiles didn't hit our missiles, and it was a great success. We hit all our targets. The Russians say, no, out of 103 cruise missiles, 71 were knocked out. That's a huge discrepancy. Who is telling the truth? And then does Trump know that the otherwise? And then who's briefing Trump? Who's telling Trump all this stuff? Is Trump actually being told the truth? I suspect he's not. So now we come to the fundamental issue of empire. What is an empire, really? Yeah, it's the drug trade, it's the international financial system centered in London, it's the ability to manipulate countries and control vast volumes of financial assets and credit that can be deployed against any country at any time. Well, all of that's breaking down. But what really is the empire? Empire is the empire of lies. That's the empire. How does it work? Just like in 1984, Winston is forced to accept an untruth about, how many fingers are up, and that breaks Winston. Okay, the Roman Empire was the same way. You were told lies that were lies, and you were forced to accept them as lies. But the Christians wouldn't do that, so they had to be killed. And that was a pain in the ass to the Roman Empire because they were the most productive citizens in the Roman Empire. But that's the system that the British have had. It's a system of lies. So you don't accept the lies, okay, then... so the LaRouche movement has consistently told you, as truthfully as was possible, given our resources. We've always told you who was running it. And we got hit hard. We got called anti-Semitics because we named the British. Right? We named the British. We didn't name the Jews. We named the British. But we got called anti-Semitic for that. Okay? We got hit by everything you can imagine. Our people went to prison. But we didn't give up. We did not give up. And we never changed the line. It was the British. And people say, how could it possibly be the British? Oh my God. Oh, you guys are nuts. Well, it is the British, my friend. It is the British. It's criminality. It's the corruptors and the criminal, the leading corrupting force. And they thought they could do it with Russia and China too. After the wall came down, they thought they could do it with China. And all of a sudden, Xi Jinping is disciplined over a million and a half Communist Party members. They couldn't. They got stopped in Russia by Putin, and they got stopped in China by Xi Jinping. So it's the empire of lies. And when does the empire end? When people finally stand up and face the threats. Because what is the lie? How does the lie work? It works on the basis of threats. You're going to accept a lie or else. But once you accept a lie, you have no moral power anymore. You have no power. But now you have major powers saying the truth. It's the British. It's the British. That's who. It's not the U.S. It's the British. They're the ones organizing this thing. They're the ones organizing for war. So that's the situation that we're in. And as we all have heard from our pastors that Satan is the father of lies. Right? The father of all lies is Satan. Well, the British today are the incarnation of Satanism. Everything that they say is a lie. Everything Satan says is a lie. Everything the British say is a lie. Oh, it's clever. It's clever. But the intention is deceit. The intention is either deceit or to obscure or to omit. It's deception. Everything is deception. That's the British Empire. That's the British system. And when you figure it out, they try to recruit you, or they kill you. That's been the British Empire. That was the Roman Empire too, by the way.